Welcome to the Wisdom Circle. To subscribe or follow us on your favorite podcast platforms, please visit us at www.thewisdomcircle.com.
Welcome to the Wisdom Circle. We're happy to have you. We're honored to have our guest, Jack Myers. I'm always happy to be with my buddy, Tony Ponturo. We always say it, 46 years, although it's close to 47, because it was 78. So it was actually 47. I got to be with you in June. So my friend of 47 years announced for the first time today. Tony and Jack. Jack, I usually say, Tony, how you doing? And then Tony will ask you how you're doing. Tony, how's it going today?
Everything's going great. We're about to hit summer, and it's going fast. I don't like as we get older that the months seem to go fast more than we like, but we're trying to do good things. We're enjoying the podcast, and as we've said many times, I think we learn as much, if not more, than even those that listen and watch us. So it's been a great experience, and as you said, we got a great guest today that's going to even teach us more. And Jack, how are you then? How are you, Jack Myers?
I'm first of all, I'm truly grateful to be here with you, and to spend time with you is an honor, but it's also fun catching up. I was thinking though, we're here, we're recording just as many people in the industry are heading to Cannes for the advertising festival. I'm not. It's my first time in 15 years, and I'm experiencing zero FOMO.
There you go.
I am so happy. And everyone I say I'm not going, they say, oh, I wish I wasn't going. So
it's turned into that, hasn't it? It is. It's like the upfront presentations and the Super Bowls. It's like, if I have to do one more of those.
So you're probably, Ray, going to enjoy the World Cup next year from your Barca lounger, just leaning back with a drink of choice.
Well, it would certainly be a Budweiser product. It's just you've got so many now. I don't know which one it would be. But yeah, so I've got a little bit of that in that Tuesday was the 1 year out date for the 2026 World Cup. And I got to say, I had a little bit of FOMO, but when I realized, the two I did were in Moscow and Qatar, that this one's in the U.S., so we'd be doing it from Miami, I'm not really going to miss that. But I understand your feeling of when you don't have it. And I'm sure, Tony, you must have some of that too. You were probably at more events than anybody, or certainly invited to more. You might not. I had to go to a bunch of them.
I always say, I went to 28 straight Super Bowls, which I think was at least the string. But yeah, I always tell people that aren't in our business, if you think of a big event, I was fortunate to go, and more than likely a couple of times. So, we had real responsibilities, but it's tough to say, you're in the pits at Daytona 500 and it's work, but it is work, Yeah.
What's interesting about Cannes, there are a lot of things interesting about it, but it's the festival of creativity. Mm-hmm. And it centers around the creative side of the advertising business at the Palais, where there are awards and there are talks by really, interesting and relevant people in the industry. But the media industry has co-opted everything around the Palais, and people don't even have badges to get entrance into the Palais. And the young people who were there, who you'd like them to give them a sense of the industry and the value of the industry, they're working on the beaches and up in the hills and at the hotels, and they're not experiencing the creativity part of the festival of creativity. And, I think about the reality of, going there, and the value was always walking along the Quisette and seeing people who today, Tony and Ray, in the heyday of the CMO being the center of, budgetary power and authority inside the major brand marketers, you didn't need to show up at Cannes or CES to see them. You could just call and go into their offices. Like, Tony, you were always incredibly accessible to anyone. Today, and we could name off the top of our heads, in the 90s, Tony Ponturos, the Jim Stengels at P&G's, the Phil Garasio at GM, Paul Mulcahy at Campbell Soup, who was your
Yeah.
client at BBDO, Ray,
Yes.
Bob Bolte at Clorox, Bob Watson at AT&T. We could rattle off 20, 25 people who not only had budget authority and internal power and authority, but were completely accessible to us.
Yes.
And today, name five. You can name Mark Pritchard at P&G, who's now chief brand officer. He's not even, he's not CMO. He doesn't have budgetary control. And so, so you got to go to Cannes to see them and, spend.
And get 3 seconds that gets turned into 47 people who had 3 seconds.
Yep. So I think that the whole culture around our industry, since we're going back a ways, but I do think a lot's been lost in our industry, in the culture and in the human connections, and in where the value is. I don't think the value is spending millions of dollars, even hundreds of millions of dollars, to have a big activation for a week on the beaches of Cannes in order to,
Crazy.
in order to connect up with the clients who, aren't even really dedicated. Tony, you were a lifetime marketer. You're a
Right.
marketer. The CMOs today are coming in from technology, from finance, and they're passing through. They're not, marketing is not their career,
Well,
which,
Jack, I was going to ask you, what do you think changed? I mean, I totally agree with what you're saying in the sense that I think companies in the past, I know I'll use Anheuser-Busch. August Busch III was, you need to be visible. You need to be able to make sure Anheuser-Busch gets the opportunities first before Miller and Coors and Heineken. And so we were encouraged to be, in a way, an identity and to meet people and to be responsive. I think, and as sort of the financial community and things became owned by different groups, it was almost squashed. It was almost, we don't want, everyone knew who Roone Arledge was and Dick Ebersol and Sean McManus. I'm going to, throw it back to Ray on Comcast and NBC as well. You really don't know who.
Don Ohlmeyer.
Yeah, Don Ohlmeyer. So it's almost like they were told, don't peek your head up. This is a corporation. We don't want personalities. And I think it's tragic for the industry. But you're the observer of the industry. How do you think it went from what you just said to where it is today? I mean, it's sad that a CMO is not accessible.
Well, you could look back, Ray, you were a part of this, I think, when the media separated out from the creative, which I was very involved in. I was the lead consultant for Garasio and Mike Browner and Betsy Lazar at General Motors when they consolidated, in the mid 90s, when they consolidated their 17 media AORs into one media buying, and then first under McCann and IPG, and then under Starcom for Planworks, and that was the beginning of that separation of media out from the agency. And look at today, when Brian Lesser at now WPP Media, it's no longer Group M, has said that within 5 years, media will be 100% non-human media buying and planning. And I think
Oh, yeah.
I think what he really meant was 2 to 3 years, but said 5. But
yeah, just because he's
already
probably
happening.
He's got his own 5-year plan. So yeah, I spent time in
and so Tony, I think to your point, that was when the creative side of the media business went over to data, technology, metrics, which is still a mess.
Right.
And then retail media has impacted that, and of course, first party data and clean rooms. So I think that and again, that goes back to Cannes and the separation of, that there is no creativity in the media experience at Cannes. And I think that's also the CMO, the role has changed dramatically, depending on the organization and the company.
Yeah. So to your point, I think talk about creativity and technology. I think if you looked at OMD, where I spent time, in Cara, we separated from the creatives. At OMD, we were a little bit more closely knit because it was still part of Omnicom. But um, and I said this to Erwin Gottlieb, who was, I worked with Erwin at Benton and Bowles, and he was a bit of a mentor along with Mark. And over time, we'd be in pitches against each other, and it would always be about who could buy it cheaper. And I said, Erwin, we're commoditizing ourselves out of the business. And that's, I think, what happened. Everybody was the same CPM, the same mix, the same blah, blah, blah. Nobody knew whatever. And now we just made it easier for all this to happen. And I do want to ask you, because and they said it on CNBC, Kramer and Faber were talking a couple of days ago about, he might have heard Lesser, that, why do we need people to run media departments? When you have enough data, do you need creative people to create creative?
I just published a piece called The Reemergence of Legacy Media. And it's built on the fact that 65% of all media today is purchased on an automated / programmatic basis. It's soon going to be 85%. That other 15% is heavily weighted towards sports, where you guys are so familiar. Thank God. But if you think about where are the legacy media going to just differentiate themselves, it's in creativity. And if they give up the creativity by moving completely to clean rooms and data and programmatic and all, it's exactly what you're talking about. They've commoditized themselves out of business and allowed themselves to move into to try to recreate what digital mastered, which is cheap overabundance of supply.
Right.
And so they've just put themselves, instead of differentiating their inventory. Now, what's still interesting is you talk to the heads of sales at NBC Universal and at Disney and at Paramount and at Fox, and they say, and you ask them, what's differential? Well, we have solutions, we have creative opportunities. Well, but yet their sales organization isn't able to sell those because they don't get access to the right people at the clients who can make a difference or a decision. So unless the legacy media, for lack of and I say that lovingly because they're the ones who brought me here, and especially the television networks, return to the kind of relationship-based selling that you guys were masters of, and buying and marketing, they're just going to continue to. I like to say that the television networks and legacy media have been brilliant over the last 2 decades at managing decline. They've managed to slow their decline, but it's accelerating.
It is. And that's kind of out of control. When Bonnie Hammer left NBC and they gave the job to Mark Lazarus, her quote was, I've never been good at managing decline.
That's exactly.
Whoa! I guess Mark must be. I mean, a little bit for Mark. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. What do you say to that?
But the relationship, Bill, I'm sorry, Ray, is where's that happening? I mean, I can cite 1,000 stories. Well, quick one is when Fox first started in '85, they were looking for 5 advertisers for all of $1 million to go into prime time, which I believe was Tuesday and Thursday nights, to go after young males 21 to 49 or probably 21 to 34 in living color and stuff like that. We said, done. We don't even know what the shows are. It just makes sense to do. That $1 million over time, and I won't bore you guys or the audience with it, had so many benefits that had nothing to do with, the data or the economics. It was the right thing to do to build a relationship. And I don't think, I wonder where those relationships to do stuff like that are today.
Well, Tony, I don't think that's boring at all, because I do think that is the solution, and it is a bit of back to the future. If you look back at the origination of the upfront, it was because every program needed a sponsor in order to get on the air. And if the networks were to take, let's say, pull out 10% of their inventory, 5% of their inventory, and follow a path of saying, okay, this is available for sponsorship. This is available for brand association. This is available for in-store promotional opportunities, for talent association. Exactly what you just described that Fox did, Tony. If they said, and that's going to be our upfront. We're not going to sell to 1,000 young 28-year-olds whose heads are in the computer looking at data at Radio City Music Hall or Lincoln Center. We're going to meet with 20 advertisers, and we're going to give you an opportunity to take a percentage of your budget in different, Garasio. Well, I remember in 1995, 96, he said, 95% of my budget, billions of my budget, is focused on achieving competitive parity. I sell cars with 5% of my budget.
Wow. Interesting. Yeah, it's so we always love to kind of bring back the wisdom circle concept. So when you talk about adaptability in your book, which is great.
Thanks for mentioning my book, by the way. Yeah, thank you.
I'm going to be the
shameless plug. We're all for it. The Tao of Leadership. It's great. I'll tell you what. Some of the connections you made between Da Vinci and Jobs and Gaudi and Geary, I'm like, I never thought of it that way. Like, and that's fun when you.
What you're talking about, the connection between technology and creativity. Yeah,
that's kind of like I'd like to call. That's a little bit. Ramona's always looking for a title. That's kind of the theme of our talk here today, which is the is it the merging? Is it the separation? Is it the what is it that's going on in your mind about creativity? I mean, you talked about it with Khan, right? So like literally, it's been hijacked by a bunch of folks who have nothing to do with creativity. How important is creativity, do you think, today? Or is it just persistence? And
well, the most important thing probably...
And you're the B answer, because I want to hear how you feel about it. I'm going to interview my buddy, what you think it is. But Jack, to you.
Well, you mentioned Anthony Gaudi in Barcelona, and Steve Jobs, who's the personification of the integration of creativity and technology. With every major technological disruption, transformation dating back to the printing press, there's been a commensurate, an exponential explosion of creativity. The Renaissance, Protestant Reformation with the printing press, the internet with YouTube and
Google,
explosion of individual creativity, television, technology, and the explosion of so we are due for, and it's actually late in coming, the explosion of creativity that's going to accompany AI. It's coming, and it's that managing decline that's preventing it in the advertising and media and marketing business that explosion. You can begin to feel it with a little bit of influencer marketing, but that's not it. And we are seeing it with agencies that are announcing, and usually they're the mid-size independent agencies that are integrating their media and their creative. But a lot of what people are talking about with AI in creativity is the ability to take a brand idea and implement 2,000 executions of it, which AI is brilliant at. But that's not what it is. It's going to be the collaboration of co-intelligence between humans and machines that are going to inspire whole new ways of looking at the world and looking at how we communicate. And it requires the media and the creative to come together. And I believe that's where the legacy media that have the sales infrastructure to be able to build creative solutions. The vast majority of the digital media sellers are totally dependent on the machines. Media agencies are increasingly dependent on the data and the machines. So it's going to be up to the humans to guide the AI to create and build those co-intelligent models that are going to see an explosion of creativity in how media is used creatively, not just the creative execution itself, but the how it presents itself in media. And that means a total disruption of the Europe is implementing a 20-second spot as the standard.
Uh-huh.
It's happened in a couple of the EU countries, and is spreading. So it's just the commoditization that the industry is allowing is itself destruction. And I believe the resurgence, the reemergence of print magazine brands, the value of the local marketplace where you're closer to the consumer, and the content itself is ready for a complete reinvention of the media creative intersection. And I'm excited for it. And I'm happy to be around. I'm happy you guys are around to be a part of it and still see it happening, because I think it's coming and coming soon.
Well, and the
that'll
key,
be
and I'll
Tony.
anticipate Ray's question is, I think we need, I find the advertising business, as I observe it, that no one's willing to take risks anymore. And if someone wants to correct me on our website, I'm happy to hear their story. You have to take risk. You have to be willing. I find the industry very safe today. No one wants to, I always say, using a sports analogy, the minute you go into a prevent defense, you're going to lose. You have to stay offensive. So using, my life is, people say, oh, when Anheuser-Busch went into ESPN, that was a really easy decision. It was all sports. I said, no, it wasn't. It had 10 million homes. They had no assets, and they had really bad sport coats with the ESPN logo. It was a risk following a gut instinct, and so I think we need some more of these pioneers that be allowed to be mavericks in the business. And again, if they're out there, I'll be stand corrected. But the financial community, being somewhat critical here, has squashed, put too many people in the room to make a decision, and thus it becomes stagnant. And one little pet peeve I have, and then I'll calm down, is, but going to the awards. I always want to say to a creative person, okay, you've got your Clio and you've got your awards, and isn't that great? Let me ask you, did that advertisement sell the product? How did you advance the product? I would bet 8 out of 10 don't know. It's like, well, yeah, but we won an award. But did it move the product? And I think we lose sight of that as we keep patting ourselves on the back. But at the end of the day, advertising is to move the product, grow market share, make revenue for your company. But the dots don't always connect.
I'm going to push back in a way you're not expecting me to push back, because there was a lot to unpack, and I want to go back to the risk aversion.
I always throw a lot at the wall, Jack. You'll learn. Ray's very patient with me.
I also want to mention, you're talking about the sports jackets on ESPN. In the 1970s or 80s, a simple phrase reinvented sports on local news, and it was Warner Wolf when he said, "Let's go to the video." And that idea of actually going to the video in the 3 minutes that they gave the sports guy was radical back then. Let's go to the video. How could you not be going to the video?
Right.
They didn't. So, but I do want to push back on the idea that the role of media is to sell a product, because what I'm concerned about is that that's no longer the case when you're looking at the data, the metrics, and you're thinking it's to buy. The role of the media agency today, and they would argue with this rightfully, is not to sell their product. It's to buy cheap media and generate as many impressions with it as they can. And that's what's disturbing, I think.
That's pretty flawed, though, right? I mean, that's terrible.
They've forgotten that their job in media is to actually sell the product.
Well, I think you're not really pushing back. I think you're reinforcing my comment.
I think we have two lines.
You're right.
The referee steps in and says, timeout. So we have a technology issue, buying cheap media through data and programmatic. And then we have a creative issue, which is, don't show me your Cannes Lion Award or Clio.
Right.
Tell me if you sold anything. And I don't know, what's the great lines we've all heard 1,000 times? When I start advertising, sales go up. When I stop, it goes down. Half my budget's wasted. I just wish I knew which half. I don't know when we know what end is up and what is actually the driver. Um, I think that's kind of like the mystery and the beauty and what keeps everybody employed is we just don't really know.
I wonder if what John Wanamaker, who's attributed with, I know only half my advertising works. I wonder if he really said, I know only half my advertising works, but I don't care which half because it works.
There's something to that.
I wonder. So, but I do, Tony, you made a great point on risk aversion, and that's Wall Street and those need for quarterly numbers that are driving. And when, when David Zaslav and Gunnar at WBD, now splitting into two companies, when their compensation is based on how much debt they reduce because of its impact on Wall Street, and their personal income is hugely impacted by how Wall Street responds to what they're doing, as opposed to what kind of company are they building for the long term. And that's the reality, that the vast majority of public company executives today are compensated based on Wall Street, which is a quarterly performance business. And when you have that kind of incentive, that's the way they run their companies. And that means they need to be risk averse. And you can't succeed in a business where one of the chapters in my book is called Don't Build Bridges, Build Portals.
Mm-hmm.
Because in today's technology world, the technology is advancing. If you're building a bridge, if you're risk averse, then you take time to innovate. And in the past, we've been given time to innovate. You could take 5 years to build a new business model. You could build a bridge to the new technology. That's why the television business has been so slow, to whether it was the broadcast industry being slow to cable, being slow to the internet, now being slow to AI. It's because they wait and see what the other guy does, and then we'll build it. Well, that's cost them billions, if not trillions in market cap. And today, the technology changes daily. And so you see an opportunity. You can't build a bridge because by the time you get to the other side, it's too late. You're building a bridge to nowhere.
Yeah.
So you got to go through the portals. And that's what the technology companies being funded by VC funding have been able to do. They've been able to see the opportunity and move quickly to it, test in practicality, not test, and learn and change, pivot on, in the moment, in real time. So it's real time management now that technology is demanding to businesses that are by design operating slowly.
So there's an interesting, I got so many things. First, I wonder if there's some connection, because you both talked about, or we talked about, industries that were resistant to change, right? The legacy media. I always think about the auto manufacturers, right, who didn't see it coming, didn't care that it was coming. And they were born in the 50s and 40s after World War II and after the Depression. And the people running those companies, walked to school with, newspapers in their shoes and, had rice for dinner or potatoes. And so I wonder how much the risk aversion has been built into the people who run those companies, and the fact that that's a different world that we're living in today might impact those companies going forward. That's thought one. Love to hear you both. Two, my friend Tony, who talks about, people didn't take enough risk, but he has hammered away at a Bud Light spot that was off center for Bud Light, we think, because so it was aimed at an LGBTQ community. I don't know how long it ran, but the outburst, the boycotts, the social media, I don't know if they were protesting in the streets or not, but people came out and went nuts about what are they doing. We don't really know, because that thing got pulled down so fast by the forces maybe it was exactly right. But the risk aversion was on the part of the Bud Light people who said, oh, God, who did that? Why? Fire him. And let's get back to business of NASCAR and truck races. So there's a
Well,
little bit, Tony, when you get not you, when one takes a risk and gets burnt, like,
yeah, but a
is it
risk
worth
has
it?
to be a smart. In other words, what I've also said about that spot, which is that beer is an image. It's a personal image that you relate to and hold in your hand. The invisible face is your face. This is who I am. I'm holding a Budweiser. I'm holding a Bud Light. I'm holding a Heineken. If you put Jack Myers' face on a Bud Light can, chances are I'm not going to drink it. That's Jack Myers, right? That's not me. That's Ray Warren. That was the mistake they made. So
I see.
so
I've
so
heard it.
marketing to the LBGT community should even be risk, should be smart play if done correctly. But you don't put someone's face on it or anyone's face. That's filling in
So
the
you think
blank.
they should have created a different brand? And I'm
We
asking,
had
I'm not
gay
like
we had
challenging,
gay
I'm just asking.
marketing in the 90s. We were doing magazines in print and point of sale in gay bars. We didn't have any boycotts. It wasn't something new. It's how they did it. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's the loss. And again, that's again being older, you have a lot of young people who haven't fought a war yet, using a little bit of an odd analogy. And there's no grizzly captain in there saying, well, wait a minute, you don't want to go up that hill because there's a big battalion you want to go up this hill because we've thought it out. And no one's thinking it out, and so that's where I get frustrated in that I always put myself, Jack and Ray, in the room and say, okay, how did that conversation go down? And what were the pluses and minuses of any campaign, right? Or any marketing deal. Um, so anyway, just putting some
It
perspective on.
does it does point to the fact that marketers are facing multiple uh, points of disruption, tsunamis. It's not just technological today; it's also, as you point out, generational. It's regulatory, which the LGBT targeting was out of touch with the regulatory environment, the governmental realities, political realities. So there's a lot that have to be taken into effect. Ray, going back to your point about the 1940s generation and the risk aversion, a lot of one of the focus of the Tao of leadership is the fact that corporations and their organizational structures and architecture is outdated. Uh, they evolved. If in 1952, Peter Drucker wrote a book called The Concept of the Corporation. It was built uh, on the model that was defined during World War II by General Motors when it had to adjust to convert from building cars to building tanks and weaponry. And they restructured the production line. They created an organizational model built on silos, divisions, departments within divisions, and the replication today in corporations still are built on the siloed uh, capabilities being organized across multiple departments, divisions. And the idea was each department or division becomes its own P&L and is managed independently. So it can be spun out at any time and be intact. Well, today, that's a completely outdated model, but 90% plus of all public companies globally are still built on that model that is heavily siloed. The same capabilities are replicated. I'm sure you and I have, Tony, you've been in situations, Ray, I know you've been in situations where you go into a company, an agency, and you're introducing people who are working on the same floor to each other because and they're doing the same job in many instances. And companies today where you have to scale back your size, your overhead, you're consolidating, you're breaking down silos, they're not organized to be able to do that. So the fundamental architecture of organizations is outdated. and is built around risk aversion, is built around silos, is built around separation, people doing the same job across multiple departments, divisions that now have to come together. And that means a return to very centralized as opposed to decentralized management, which has its own issues, of course.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
and top-down management, one of the common threads you see at companies like Microsoft, Apple, Meta, and others is very top-down direction guidance, and everyone has to understand what the North Star is. The problem for most companies today is you can't see the North Star anymore, but that's a whole other issue.
Yes. No, you said that. It's funny because, I, I, I spent 15 years at Raycom Sports, which was a ground up. And then I spent time at NBC and ABC then to Raycom, then NBC, which was more top down. But I think you said something in your book, unless you've been at the ground floor, that the ground up management is, now those are the best places to go and those are the best people. And I was actually thinking that Apple, with Steve Jobs in the garage and Zuckerberg in his dorm room, so quickly went to top down, right? Like these were guys who were like literally like fusing things with a soldering iron, I guess, and built companies and then lost sight of that, it seems. So I wonder if it's avoidable or if I'm off.
Well,
both of you guys, Jack, you first.
Tony, I'll let you go first on that because you're closer to it.
Well, there's a great, remember Paul Harvey, who was, I think he was out of Chicago radio morning announcer. And if you can find it, I don't know how to title it, but he exactly does this sort of like verbal essay on exactly what Ray said, how companies, when they start out lean, they get input, they're proactive, they take risks, they do everything. And then they get to a certain size and they get nervous and they start to play defense. And it all comes, it all gets stagnant. It's and with Paul Harvey's voice, it's brilliant. So it's just the great
it's a danger. I go back to my CBS days where I really built my 8 years at CBS in the late 70s, early 80s, really defined my career. And it was defined because I started out as the most junior retail salesperson at the WCBS TV Channel 2 in New York.
You're calling on what, Petco, or were you calling on the pizza place?
Yeah, I sold to Crazy Eddie. I took him out. I came from WPLJ radio and ABC radio, and Crazy Eddie was my client. He was paying $200 a spot for WPLJ in its heyday. And I went over to CBS where we had, in the middle of the night, we had a 2 rating for our movies we were showing in the middle of the night. And I went out to Crazy Eddie and we were charging $50 a spot for it in the middle of the night. And I went out to Crazy Eddie, who wasn't doing television. And I said, look, Eddie, first of all, you had to go into the store, out the back, down the street, up the stairs. You had to talk to 4 people who said, yeah, I'm Eddie, and then finally get to Uncle Eddie, who would take you into Crazy Eddie. But Eddie, who was crazy, and for the $200 that you're paying on for WPLJ and in radio, I'll put you on in the middle of the night, our 2 rating, and you'll buy a spot in every break. You'll drive people crazy, so you're crazy. And we'll pay for your commercial. We'll do your commercial for you. So I got $50 to $200. And because I did that, my boss at the time, a guy named Mike DeGennaro, was an amazing sales executive, went on to sell at A&E Network for a while, but he made me retail sales manager. And this goes back to the top down, bottom up idea. And I implemented a program that targeted the big department stores who were not buying advertising. And why aren't they buying advertising? Because we were selling them brand. Saks Fifth Avenue, 98% of your budget's vendor dollars, your next day sales. Take that other 2% and sell your brand. Well, they failed every time they tried. So I said, why aren't we going after the 98%? So we created something called the framework for ensuring retail success with television. Went out to department stores, had a great job. And as a result, I got to run the retail sales operations for the 5 TV O&Os at the time. It was 100% top down. What I forgot to do was manage up and manage those general managers and general sales managers who had lost control of a team of salespeople within their organization. So I forgot the human component of.
There you go. Good point.
And the need to also think about what are the implications? Who else are you impacting? How do you bring everyone under the tent? It's not just the results maybe that you generate, but it's also the impact. So then along came a general manager who I was Tom Leahy was my boss at the time, and he was brilliant. He was an amazing executive, and he was replaced by Neil Darrow, who was also a very good executive, but also had 5 general managers who were all pissed off at me. And that was also the time when cable was coming in, and I was a big fan and advocate of cable. It was actually part of my job to look at technology. And they said to me, if you think cable's so effing great, go
I remember reading that line.
Yeah,
so
me
I
too.
did. But the important, I think, part of that combination today is if you're managing down, you better recognize that you're impacting a lot of individuals. And if those people at the grassroots don't have clarity of purpose, and you go into those media agencies today and you ask them, what's your organization's purpose? You go into brands, Tony, and you talk to the people who are running the brands in procurement and control. Do they understand what the brand purpose is? And I think we're forgetting the human part of it as we're investing in technology. And that's the greatest danger of AI, is that it takes us further away from humanity instead of closer to it.
Yeah, no, it's got to be fun. I mean, I love that you reference Peter Drucker in your book a lot, and I'm an apostle of Drucker. I love what he said, and in one quote, and I'm paraphrasing. I don't really care about the nuts and bolts of a company. I care about the human spirit and how people interact, and I just think it's so important. And I think the brilliance, my last Anheuser-Busch reference, is that what August Busch understood was that media and sports was a unique area. And so, as you know, we brought in the business. Bush Media Group was the pioneer of these media companies. I think I tried to articulate that once at one of your dinners at 11:11, and I don't know if everyone was buying it, but it's like, no, because companies got nervous. Well, if Anheuser-Busch just took in $500 million in media internally, so can GM, and so let's do it a hybrid. Let's create all these other different media agencies. But he understood, I got to keep procurement out. I got to keep the financial people out. His whole thing was, none of us were ever under contract. It was, I have to trust you. The minute I don't trust you, just walk out the door. We don't have a contract, so it doesn't matter. But he allowed the division head, the department head, first Chuck Fruit, then myself, to be the entrepreneur, right?
So glad you mentioned Chuck Fruit.
And I don't enough, Jack, and because he taught me a lot, and God bless him. As those that don't know, he started at Anheuser-Busch and spent another 15 plus years at Coca-Cola, running their global media and sports marketing. Sadly, passed away in his probably early 60s.
Mm-hmm.
But he was it's sort of like Ray and I in the podcast. Ray's the buttoned up guy, and I'm the guy throwing stuff at the wall. So at Anheuser-Busch, Chuck was the buttoned up guy.
Yeah, Tony says I don't need B to Y. I go A. I got A. Get me to Z. I'm like, I need B, C, D, E, F.
so it works. You need that compliment. But anyway, and so when I started doing other things after Anheuser-Busch, and I realized I enjoyed being more an entrepreneur versus working for a big corporation again, I realized that I really was, if I can say so, an entrepreneur within a big corporation because our CEO allowed us to do it. And so if I was going to be on the top of a pulpit, I would say these corporations, these CEOs, you know, you got to let marketing be marketing. If you don't have the right people, get the right people. But don't bring in financial people and procurement people and everyone else trying to tell you how to do this. It's not their mentality any more than I know how to figure out what EBITDA is. Anyway, that's a 5-minute warning.
Earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and that's. Okay, so we're hitting the 5-minute warning time.
That's 5-minute warning. So you take it home. I'll shut up now.
No! Don't you dare! But so there were two things that I wrote on notes, Jack, that we exchanged with Tony and Ramon, and I want to get to two of them because I think that might do it. And if we go over, we're not going to turn off the lights and send home the people. Talk a bit for a moment or two about the lessons school didn't teach. What are the one or two things that pop up when you say the things that really I want to talk about are the lessons that school didn't teach?
Thanks for that. And Tony, I do want to go back to Peter Drucker because he's also the one who said marketing has to be at the center of every company.
Yeah.
And so I think as companies do recognize as they consolidate, as they break down silos, as they go through the incredible disruption that's coming to everyone in every company in the next day, 36 months, that if they don't put marketing at the center and if they don't return to the human element of marketing and the relationship aspect of marketing, and they just go with the metrics, the data, they're going to be lost. So thanks for reminding us of that positive aspect of what Peter Drucker taught us. And it is all in Peter Drucker's book. Don't follow the World War II model. It's interesting. I spent 4 years at Syracuse University in what's in the Newhouse School of Communications, and I love radio, television. And then I went to work at ABC Radio in New York, and they gave me the opportunity to get a master's degree. So I looked for something that was at night, something that was at media, and I found something strangely called media ecology at NYU, being taught by Neil Postman, who's now having written a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death, Public Discourse in the Age of Show Business. He predicted Donald Trump and what's happening in the political environment. But the role of media, he really helped me understand Marshall McLuhan. And any student of communications and media today and marketing who doesn't read or at least understand the sentence, medium is the message. And the name of the book is actually The Medium is the Massage, because what Marshall McLuhan taught us is it's not that we need to understand when we're looking at the content that's being communicated, the source, who it's coming from. And today that's more important than ever to understand that it's not just the content, it's who's delivering influencer marketing, who is the influencer who you're trusting. And what do they really stand for, especially as they adjust their political compass, depending on where the audience is, as opposed to what's really their personal messaging. But it's also the medium is the massage, which is the creative. It's how it works inside your brain, how it implements on your muscle. It's the massage. And the medium. So what they didn't teach me, although at Syracuse in a class focused on radio, television, an actor now still called radio, TV, film, strangely.
Right.
But learning and understanding the human aspects of what we're doing and how media is really influencing so much of our world today, so much of what we see, so much of how we react, respond, and relate to each other. And when businesses are just totally focused on how they serve Wall Street, they're ignoring how they serve the human condition.
Exactly.
Ethics, bias in AI. Who's paying attention to the ethics, the bias that's being built in?
Yeah, I think that That's a really good point. And I think we've become kind of numb to the effect. So I don't even think people know that they're either being affected or not being affected. Okay, so lightning round. One last question. What advice would you give to your? We love this one. What advice would you give to your 25-year-old self for our younger audiences who are 25 to 35?
Well, I'd probably, first of all, to my 25-year-old self, say, buy Apple.
Good call.
Sell your CBS stock.
Yeah.
You know, to my 25-year-old self, I'd probably say, think about, I'd probably say, don't be so sure of yourself. Don't be so sure that your ideas that you think are inevitable are going to happen in the time frame you need to happen them in for them to be successful. And I'd probably say it's a long game. You're playing a long game, Jack. So,
good for you.
That's good advice.
Yeah.
You're Barry Diller. It's exactly what Barry's written in his book. Don't be so sure of yourself and play for the long game. But seriously, it's like, whoa. And other answers have been similar, like slow it down. Because I think one of the things that we've got with this current generation is this now mentality. And gee, I've been here 6 months. How come I'm not a vice president? Tony, you want to close it out with some final thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think it's, Jack, first of all, thank you very much. I think, it was very stimulating. You got me all energized, so now I got to figure out what I'm going to do this afternoon to burn off this energy. And our goal, which hopefully we accomplished, is, A, to be interesting, but really to teach, I think to teach particularly people who haven't been through the process to say, oh, I didn't think of that. When I taught a little bit as an adjunct, I would always say, we're going to have 15 classes, but if you take away 2 or 3 things, that's a win. Not everything's going to be brilliant, but you'll remember 2 or 3 things for the rest of your life. And I think, it's important for particularly young people, and even those that are not so young, to say, you know what, that makes a lot of sense. I didn't think about that. And that's why I like when we sort of push the envelope and not be afraid to say things. And you've been what I'll call an observer. Maybe that's I mean in the most respectful way of the industry in general, and have worked both as a consultant and alongside so many different companies and people. So you've really seen the different mechanics going on. So I think
influencing too. The observance is influenced.
Exactly.
If I may,
go ahead, Jack. Go ahead.
No, if I may, because you talk about teaching, and there's a story there. I teach a class at the University of Arizona, and it's in the School of Information Sciences. The School of Information Sciences evolved out of the School of Library Sciences. And the school is just introducing a group of AI courses, training AI, but there's been a debate in the school of how professors should adapt to AI. And there is a group of professors who are restricting and not allowing students to use AI. I required my students to use AI, but I had a conversation with one of the professors and I said, it's interesting. You're in a school that originated as the School of Library Science. Telling students they can't use AI today is like decades ago when the Dewey Decimal System was invented to help guide people in a library. It's like telling them you can't use the Dewey Decimal System to find the book you want.
That's a great analogy.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
Well, I think you're totally. And by the way, they're going to use it anyway, Prof. So I don't know what you think you're kidding, but you have kids, Professor. All right. So once again, honored and thankful to have you join us.
Totally mutual, and I'm so grateful that you invited me, and I think I actually invited myself because I really wanted to be a part of your conversation. I love what you're doing, and so appreciative that you're doing it.
Well, we thank you for being on, and we're here for the long term. So who knows? We'll circle back and see what's going on. Get your thoughts on the next 30 years, which you were pretty good at 30 years ago. So that's for another time.
It's a long game.
Yes.
Thanks again,
Jack.
Jack.